All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So let's talk today about bow ties or going beyond bow ties. And so this webinar is more or less the sequel of the one we gave 3 weeks ago, about cybersecurity. And so today it's not going to be about cybersecurity, but about modeling multidimensional threat landscape, right? Oops. So as I said, it's can be seen as a sequel of the webinar we gave 3 weeks ago. So this one, it has been recorded. This one is recorded too, obviously. So if you had not seen the first one, you can still go to our website and see the recorded version. So here is the agenda for today. And as usual, I thought it would be a light one, but unfortunately, it's going to be quite full. So first of all, I want to say thanks to Nicolas, one of my contacts, who just reached out to me just after the webinar on cybersecurity and sent me this radar. So first of all, I think it's quite nice. And when I saw this radar, I just could not resist creating a risk-centric causal network on that, just to see if I was able to have a very useful causal network. And it happens that after a few minutes, I had one. And so this is how the idea of this webinar came. So I said, okay, now let's switch to something more interesting than just cybersecurity and go to something larger. And so this is a radar that have been produced by, the federal, the Federal Intelligence Service of Switzerland. So it was published in 24. So they are sending this report to the population, and so it's quite interesting an approach. And so here you can see that we have 7 different type of threats. So I'm not going to go into the details right now, but so this is going to be the topic of this webinar, right? So just a few words about what we're going to use for that. So this was really the topic of the last webinar, how to go from a qualitative representation of risk with bow ties to something that is not only qualitative but also quantitative by building risk-centric causal networks. So this is the structure of these networks where we have a top event and then we are identifying what are the threats, what can be used for protecting or reducing or mitigating these threats. So this leads to what we call a sub-risk. And then we have these sub-risks that have an impact on the top event, the main risk. So that can trigger this main risk. And once we have the main risk, then we have consequences that can be also mitigated by mitigating barriers, right? So we have different types of nodes, different layers, if you want, in this causal network, right? So as I said, the agenda is quite full, and because I first want to show you how we can generate this, I'm going to call that RCCN for short, so risk-centric causal network. So we can start building that just by using the implicit knowledge of the LLM, the large language models, right? So which means that there is absolutely no documents. We are using the knowledge that is encoded in the deep neural networks that are used in the LLMs, right? Then we are going to see how we can induce or create this RCCN, but this time by using the information that is contained in the threat radar, right? And after that, we're going to create another one, but instead of using the radar, which is a kind of already a summary of just one single page in the report. So here we are going to focus on one chapter, like 20 pages that I have extracted from this chapter, and it's about strategic environment. And we are going to use these 20 pages for inducing an RCCN, right? After that, this is a very frequent question. So when we have this type of network that has been created by using a document, so the question is, can we distinguish what is the implicit knowledge and what is the explicit knowledge? So the one that comes from the LLM and the one that has been kind of extracted from the knowledge file. so the file we are using for the induction of this network. And then after that, we are gonna also switch to something that is quite interesting, so using BiZLab for optimizing. So I'm gonna create a virtual hypothetical scenario, threat scenario with different level of threats. And based on that, we are gonna use the genetic algorithm of BiZLab for trying to find what are the best preventive set of preventive barriers that we can use to reduce the risk. And we are going to conclude with how to share this model, so by using the web simulator and also a helix map, right? So as you can see, we have these 6 points to cover. I hope it's going to be okay in 1 hour. But before going into the details, as usual, let's just have a quick look at how we are working, what is the workflow we are using. So in Bayesian, we are a specialist of Bayesian networks, but now we are also creating other types of graph. But today it's about causal Bayesian networks. So this is the brain of our probabilistic expert system, if you will. And these graphs can be either machine learn when we have data, structured data. We can also build them by using expert knowledge. And we can also do knowledge mining by using Helixia. So that will allow us to extract, to go from a black box that are the LLMs to a crystal box that are these causal Bayesian networks, right? So we are going to extract this knowledge and create a causal Bayesian network. And once we have these fully quantified Bayesian networks, then we can use them for decision support. So we can do simulation, diagnosis, optimization, analysis, risk management. And today we are going to do everything except here diagnosis, right? And for that, we are going to use BiZLab. So this is our flagship product, and our web simulator for sharing the model to everybody, right? But we are going to also use helix maps. So this is our tool for really, exploring easily the models, the qualitative part of the graph. So this is really for knowledge interpretation, visualizing, exploring, and also, most importantly, sharing the model with you, right? But so let's start with the main topic of today. So trying to build RCCNs, or risk-centric causal network, but first by using the implicit knowledge of the LLM only, right? So we are going to create this kind of network. So let's see how this works in action. So we are going to see how, so here this is BiZLab, so this is a started page of BiZLab, and we go directly to the automatic causal network generator. Then we can enter our main question. So today's it's Switzerland national security. And then we are going to switch to the advanced mode to select first the completion model. So we are using the very last models that have been released a few days ago by Anthropic, so Claude Sonnet 4.5, sorry. But we have a large list of available LLMs. And then we just check here complexity and we select low. So we just want to create a very simple causal network here. And this is not just a causal network, but a risk-centric causal network. And here I'm going to uncheck this new option that is utility augmented causal network. So this is something I will have to use at the very end for the optimization, but not right now. So I'm checking this option. And then, so obviously this is fast forwarded. We have here networks that have been created. So we can also see that we have last week added some very specific colors to really be able to identify very quickly what are the type of nodes. So you see these, I hope, nice colors. So we have purple for the threats, we have the green for the preventive barriers, we have the red for the main risk, we have the orange for the sub-risk, we have the maroon or something like that for the consequences, and the blue for the mitigating barriers. And you can also see that we have blue arcs, red arcs. So blue arcs means that this has a positive direct effect on the child. Red means that this is a negative direct effect, right? So all these effects have been quantified by the LLM. So here, the 4.5 by Sonnet, by Anthropic, I mean. So we have this network, and then we are gonna explore it by using helix map. So this is now our usual, workflow. We generate the graph, and when the graphs are quite big, it's much easy to go to helix map and explore the network via helix map, right? So I just enter my credentials, and then this is opening automatically helix map. So I can use Helk for having a layout that is very useful for this RCCN, right? And we can find here the same colors, obviously, as the ones that have been used in Bayesian. When you hover over the node, you have the comments that have been associated with the node. So this is a sub-risk here, cyber attack on critical infrastructure. So you can see this is really the sequel of the last webinar that was really dedicated only on this topic. But there is a second risk that is the espionage, right? And the last one, terrorist attack, right? So by using the implicit knowledge, by choosing a very small, low complexity, we have extracted three main threats, right? And then, so we have the actual threats. So we have the advanced persistent threat group active here. So in purple, in green, we have the barriers that have been associated. So we can again see that one of the most efficient barrier for cyber attack is the network segmentation. So this is exactly what we had during the last webinar too. Then here's for the espionage, we are going to have the barriers that are counterintelligence operation and security clearance procedure. And then for the terrorist attack, we have the counterterrorism, border security enhance, and diplomatic engagement. The main risk in red, and then here the consequences, right? And in blue, we have the mitigating barriers. All right? So this is very easy to explore via helix map, right? You are not overwhelmed by all the details, very easy to explore. Then let's go back to Bayesian. I just display, here the comments that have been associated with the links. So these comments are describing the relationship between the child and the parent. So here it's a little bit too small for you, I guess, to read. And if I edit the node, we're going to see that the model has been quantified, right? So not only we have the structure, the causal relationship, but we also have the direct effect that have been estimated by using the LLM, right? So here you see we have a fully specified conditional probability distribution that have been defined by using a dual noisier that allows us to take into account positive and negative effects. So we can see that we have here a positive leak. So this is also new. So we just added this feature this week just to be able to, after building the network, to change the leak if you want. So here, we have used a constant. So this way, if you want to set the leak to 0, you can always change it afterwards, right? And then we see that the effect of the foreign intelligence operation have been estimated to 0.8, quite strong, and the counterintelligence operation to minus 0.7. So this is used to mitigate the first one, right? And so obviously we have this equation associated with all the nodes that are not root nodes. So, and just to indicate that in this example, I've not used the LLM for estimating the priority of the root nodes, right? So priors are not bit estimated. We are assuming that this is the user that will define these probabilities by using the simulator. So here we see that by clicking on the constant icon, we can see the value of the leaks, right? So we have a positive leak and negative leak for the threat and for the mitigators. Here we are just using the positive leak. And then if we go to settings here, we are going to be able to to define what is the value by default that we want to use. So if I enter leak in the search box here, this will highlight Helixia, and then I can define the value of my leak that I'm going to use when I'm generating my dual noise error, right? So after that, so we have this, as I said, equation associated with all nodes. So then we have a fully specified Bayesian network, and then I can switch to validation mode to really to exploit this network and carry out probabilistic inference, right? So we see that with all the priors that have been automatically defined here, but very basic rules that depends on the number of root nodes. So here we see that we have a marginal probability of 14% for the Switzerland national security being true. So risk is true here in that case. And so here I'm just focusing on the cyber attack node. So we can see that the value of the cyber attack is, the risk is 6%. And if I set an evidence here on the threat, so let's say it's true, then obviously this is increasing the risk of having a cyber attack. So since the effect was 0.8, we have something like 0.74 because we have still a little bit of barrier that are activated here. And then if I set that we have a defense plus a segmentation, we are reducing the risk of cyber attack being successful to less than 8%, and the result on the Switzerland national security has been reduced to 15%, right? So this is how we are, so this arranged node, the cyber attack critic, cyber attack on critical infrastructure, is a result of the threat, of the mitigated threat, if you will, right? So let's clean and remove all the evidence and now use our usual tool. So we can make a right click on the monitor panel and then, sort the monitor with respect to the correlation with the target node. And then we see that the most important, or the node that has the strongest mutual information with the target, is a terrorist organization planning. We also have defined automatically cost, because here, obviously, the sub-risks are not directly observable. The consequences are not observable. So we are setting these as not observable. All the other ones have a cost of 1, which means that we can use them for setting evidence, right? And also for analyzing their effect on the target. So all the not observable are going to be excluded from the analysis. So this is the reason why we don't have here on the right, we don't have any monitor associated with the sub-risk or the consequences, just the threats and the barriers, right? So if I set terrorist organization planning true, then this is increasing the risk to 70%. Then if I activate barrier border security enhance, this is reducing the risk to 28%. All right. So let's remove the evidence set and switch to just to see how this works. We can also use an adaptive questionnaire. So this is a tool that allows us to dynamically, give you the most informative nodes. So here I'm just going to say I want to focus obviously on the target, just have the best question to ask to reduce the uncertainty on the risk. And so obviously this is the strongest one that comes up. And this is terrorist organization. So let's suppose that I'm setting an evidence. So I'm going to use a probabilistic evidence. I don't have to set 0 or 100. I can also define probabilities. So let's say that the specialists are evaluating the risk to 80% for the terrorist threat. So here we set this, and obviously what happens is that there is a barrier that is suggested. So we need to implement counter-terrorism intelligence, right? So let's suppose we do that. So this is reducing the risk for the national security, right? So we can play with that and set another one here, 44% for the cybersecurity threat, and so on, right? And to conclude with this, we can use the total effect. So just try to, a tool that will allow you to directly measure the effect of each threat and barrier. So here we see that this is obviously the terrorist threat that has the strongest impact on risk, and the most efficient barrier is a counterterrorism intelligence active here, right? So very quickly we can have information about the strength of the threat and the efficiency of the barriers, right? So this was the first example by using just the implicit knowledge. And now, really quick, I will show you another one, but where I will not just restrict the complexity, so use the default complexity. So I'm not going to specify any complexity. I will let the LLM choose the best one, right? So this is the networks that have been generated with that. So you see, we go from 3 threats or sub-risk to 10 here. So this is the network that is available in Helix map. So if you want, you can use a QR code here to access this network. And here, this is how we can explore this network. And so we are now using Helix map, right? And so that we have classes that have been automatically associated with this network. So we have, as I said, 10 threats that have been identified. So if I check here threats, I will just display the threats that have been selected. Then if I do preventive barrier, I'm adding the preventive barrier. Then I have the sub-risk. So again, the definition of the sub-risk at the end of the day, this is a result of the mitigated threat, right? So usually we have one threat and one or more associated barriers, right? And here, this is also something we added a few days ago, because when we start building this kind of network, we end up with a huge network. So in that case, for example, this is like we have 10 sub-risks that are connected to the main risk. So which means that we have 10 parents for the main risk. And as you know, in a Bayesian network, we have a conditional table, priority tables that is associated with the target node here. And so if everything is binary, which is the case here, true and false, then we have a conditional priority table that takes into account all the combinations of the values of the parents. So which means here we have 2 to 10 probabilities to represent. So this is starting, so 10, it's okay, but we're going to see in a few minutes that we can generate much more than that. So in order to prevent to lost memory for nothing, because there is a way to reduce that, we are divorcing here the parents. So we have automatically created these 2 green nodes so that are noisier of the parents here. So this is a way to reduce the complexity. We are not losing any information, but we are compressing the representation, right? So we have these sub-risk here in green, then they are connected. So at the end of the day, the main risk has only 2 parents. And then we have the consequences. So we have 7 consequences that have been estimated here, right? And 10 mitigating barriers, right? So if I use my neighborhood function here, so I can make a right click on a node, and then we have the function that allows you to just focus on the neighborhood so that you can define the radius. By default, it's 1, so I'm going to keep 1, so which means that I'm going to have the parent and the children. But if you set 2, obviously, you will include more nodes. So you're going to include the grandparents and grandchildren. So here we keep 1, and we can also decide what is going to be the layout algorithm that we want to use for displaying this new subnetwork, if you want, right? So here I'm going to use degree, and then we have, so terrorist attack. So this is again, among the 10 threats that have been identified, we still have terrorist attack, right? So with 2 barriers here. Then if I double click on the graph, I come back to the default view. The second threat is same thing, cyber attack, right? Then the third one, this is the classified information stolen, so espionage, same thing. Then we have the sovereignty violated, territorial. Then the state institution corrupted. We have the extremism, radicalism, then the democratic institutions that are destabilized, external essential supply shortage, border control overrun by migration, and public health crisis, right? So these are the 10 new threats that have been identified when I'm not, asking for a simple or a low complexity causal network. And then we have a set of consequences here. So you see mass causality on population displacement, democratic system breakdown, and so on. Plus here, the mitigating barriers in blue, right? All right, so now let's switch to the radar. So what has triggered at the end of the day this webinar. So as you can see, we have it's a very nice representation, but at the end of the day, not that easy to read because you have colors, you have lengths of the threads, and at the end of the day, these two are identical, so if you have just one when it's yellow, it's a very short one. When it's dark red or even maroon, it's like 6 boxes. So there is a perfect correlation between the color and the number of boxes here. And you have 7 families of threats here. So you have in green, you have the security-related events abroad. Then we have the non-proliferation, the illegal intelligence, cyber threats, terrorism. We have the extremism. We have also the crime situation, security and crime situation from a police perspective, right? So these are the 7 families of threats, and we have, at the end of the day, 48 threats that have been identified by the FIS, right? So obviously, to be honest, I tried just to load this image in ChatGPT or Claude and try to extract a file with all the information. It did not work, but at least I was able to have all the labels, right? So, but they were kind of colorblind, so we are not able to estimate the risk. So at the end of the day, I had to manually edit this file. So here is a file I use as a knowledge file. So I just have a first paragraph that describes the context, obviously. And then I have the list of the 48 identified threats, and I have also extracted the risk level. So not 100% sure what it means exactly in this report because there is no legend for that, but it's like is it a product between probability and gravity or impact? Probably, right? So here at the end of the day, we have risk levels that goes from 1, that is a yellow one if you want, to 6 when it's very high. So we have 6 or 7 threats that have a level of 6. So these are the darker one and longer one, if you want, in this radar, right? So I have these files that I'm going to use as a knowledge file in Bayesian for Helixia to analyze, right? So let's see how it works live. So now I go to the Helixia menu, go to document analysis, then causal network generator, same thing. I can choose my LLM. Then I open, I'm selecting my file. It's my text file. I have a warning as usual, because obviously if you are not going to share sensitive information with the LLM here because it's his public ones, but here it's public, so I don't have any problem with that. Then I say yes, and I can, it's always a good idea to click on the eye icon just to see if everything has been correctly interpreted. So we have the file here. And then we are gonna define the general context with the land security, even though it's already described at the very beginning of the knowledge file. Complexity here, I'm gonna set high because at the end of the day, in the ideal network, I will have 48 threats, right? If he's able to identify all these threats. It's a risk-centric. and I'm not setting any other options. Then in real time, it took like 2 minutes for that, right? Then I have my network classes that have been automatically generated. And just to check that for this one, I've been able to identify the 48 threats. So I have 48 threats, 48 sub-risks, and then I have the preventive barriers and so on, right? So I'm glad we have all the risks that have been identified from the knowledge file. Then, as usual, I go to the headix map. I have my 48 threads. So if I check that, you see all the threads, then 16 preventive barriers, then 48 sub-risk. So again, the logic here is to say that the sub-risk is a result of the mitigated threat. Right? Then we are going to have 10 sub-risk aggregator. So these are the new feature we added a few days ago, and I'm glad we have that because otherwise it would be okay in Helix, but not in Bayesian Lab because we will have 48 parents. So you can imagine 2 to 48. I will let you do the computation. And then we have the main risk here with 10 parents. We have 19 consequences and 19 mitigating barriers, right? So my usual workflow, oops, sorry, I clicked on the wrong button. So let me go back here and fast forward to here we are. So this is my neighborhood function, right? So I will select the Helk layout for this one. And so if I focus on the main risk here, I have the 10 parents that are my 10 sub-risks. So each one is summarizing 5 threats, right? Except the last one that has only 3, because I have 48, right? So if I'm just taking one example, I'm focusing on sub-risk number 0. So we have 5 threats here that belong to this sub-risk. So I'm not being clustered by using any semantic here. It's purely algorithmic. And so we have cybercrime, we have human trafficking, we have drug trafficking, organized crime, and financial crime here, right? And then if I continue here, and so we have the comments that are also associated with the links here. So we see, for example, that organized crime has a direct effect of 75 on the main risk, right? And if we focus on financial crime here, we see that obviously it depends on financial and economic crime. So this is the threats, and we have 2 preventing barriers that have been identified. So financial regulation effective and law enforcement. Right? I go back to my sub-risk, and then I will focus on the cybercrime. So again, the topic of the last webinar. So the threat is cybercrime, and the barriers are cybersecurity measures and law enforcement. So we can see here that we have barriers that are shared by different threats, right? Or different sub-risks, if you want here. And here I'm just taking one consequence randomly here. This is a radicalization. So we have 3 mitigating barriers that have been identified. So the de-radicalization program, public communication, and crisis management. And same thing, we have the effect. So for example, here, de-radicalization program has a negative effect on the consequences. So this is reducing the consequences. Hence the red links. All right, so we go back to Bayesian Lab. We use a target correlation feature to display the monitors, and we see that the most important, the one that has the strongest mutual information with the risk is a conventional war in Europe. So this was one of the risk with a level of 6, right? So you see the impact is 95% on the risk, okay, which is national security here. And if we go to generate the total effect tornado diagram, we are going to have a visualization of the effect of all these threats, the 48, and also the effect of the barriers. Okay? So this is based on just the radar. So now another step is to see what happened if we were to directly, because the radar is just one, it's even not a page, it has been pasted in the report like that. So it's a kind of summary, I guess, of this report. Even though there are no seven, I was expecting 7 chapters in this report, one per family of threat, but I did not find these 7. So, but here what I did is just I focus on the first important chapter, so 20 pages about the strategic environment, right? So I have used these 20 pages to create a text file. And even though I can also directly use a PDF at the end of the day, but here I use a text file. And so here it's more or less the same workflow. We go to Helixia, document analysis, causal network generator. We have, so here I switched to Gemini 2.5, sorry, and to have something more comprehensive. And then, so the context is the same. And I'm selecting a complexity of a medium one, right? So I don't want to have something too complex for this webinar. And as you can see, I have also checked the utility augmented, so which means that I'm going to have utility nodes that will be associated with my barriers, right? So this is going to be useful for my optimization example. So then I have 2 minutes later this kind of graph. Go to a helix map as usual. And then, so I use Helk and we can see the classes. So I'm not gonna go through each classes, but we see that we have 17 threats that have been identified, so 17 sub-risk. Then we have 11 preventive barriers, 8 mitigating ones, and 10 consequences, right? So we have 4 sub-risk for reducing the complexity. Here, this is weakened NATO deterrence due to the US disengagement. So if we double click on that, so this is really extracted from the chapters that have been written by the FIS, right? So we have here. So it was in 24, right? Just before the election. Right, so this was one identify threat. We have another one here. Depending of political, economic, technological, and military ties between Eurasian autocracies. And a last example, increase political and economic pressure on Switzerland. So where we see that one of the barriers consists in effective Swiss neutrality and independent foreign policy. Right? The consequences and the identify mitigating barriers, right? Then same workflow, I switch to validation to display the monitors based on the meter information. So in this one, so the most important node is US foreign policy shift towards isolationism. And then the tornado diagram, right? So quite interesting. But then the question is, what is the information that really comes from the chapter and what is coming from the implicit knowledge of the large language models, right? So this is a very frequent question that we had. And so what I'm going to show you here today is just a prototype. So this is something I've done, but it's not directly available right now on HelixMap. So because I think it's going to be on HelixMap or perhaps in Bayesian via Elixir too. But so far, it's just for myself. But I have a tool that allows me to do that. So I can use the network that comes from HelixMap and then the knowledge files that have been used to generate the RCCN and see what are the matching between the node and the text we use for the generation of the network, right? So when it's green, this means that there is a high score, and when it's red, a low score, right? So let's see how. So I've used my personal tool, if you want, for that, and modify it to be able to illustrate it in HelixMap. And then I have a network that has an augmented network, if you will, so that it's really the networks that I show you. So we have at the very beginning, you have the comments that have been generated by the LLM. So this one, for example, continuation and potential expansion of conventional high-intensity warfare between states in Europe, exemplified by Russian aggression, so on and so on. So this is the comments that have been generated by the LLM. And then after that, as you can see, there is even the beginning in French. So we have a score, so that allows you to see what are the excerpts in the text that are matching with this node, right? So here we see that there is the first one, Russian aggression has brought a return to interstate warfare to Europe. So this has a very high score with this node. So this is really coming, has been extracted from the chapter, right? So when it's very quickly, you can see that we have all these colors from green to red. And if we focus on the threads, so we see that everything is green, so which is good news, right? So we see that we have really extracted information from the report. So it's not implicit knowledge. It's not, I would not call that hallucination because it's, even though it's not coming from the text, it does not mean it's hallucination. It's just used by using the implicit knowledge, right? So here it's a little bit lower, but it's still there, right? And then so it makes sense, right? Because this chapter is really describing the threats, and here we are focusing on the preventive barrier, and we can see that it's more red than green, right? And this is because there is no mention of barriers in this report, right? So here a little bit there is this one, so the strong transatlantic alliance with the US. And and for the consequences, same thing. It's red or green, but here it's green, but it's a false green. If you read carefully, you see that there is a high score, but this is consequences of the risk for Switzerland, so massive increase in defense expenditure. But here the match is for the same dimension, but for other countries. So those who are the threats indeed. So this is, you cannot just say, oh, this is coming from the report. No, this one, it's a false green, if you want, even though it's not wrong either, right? So it's just not matching this document, right? So I think it's quite interesting to have this additional information, right? And these are the mitigating barriers, and obviously it's also red, right? So nothing was mentioned in the chapter. So this has to be carefully checked then by the peers, right? So by the subject matter experts. Okay. Now let's switch to optimization. So you have seen that I've checked the option UT augmented when I have generated my model. So which means that, as you can see on this network, I have my green nodes, I have my barrier, my threats, my consequences, and so on, plus the diamond nodes here that are utilities, right? Plus, as you can see also, an overall utility, a function node. So I'm going to show you how we can use BaselLab for optimization. So first, what I did, I created a virtual or hypothetical scenario. So I use here we have a feature that is target optimization by using a genetic algorithm. So here what I did, I started with the network generated by the LLM, and I say, okay, I want to have a prior, an initial value, marginal value of the risk equal to 50%. And I want you to define what are the probability associated with the threats in order to get exactly 50%. Well, exactly, more or less, because it's 50.03. And then, so I got this set of values for the threats. So I'm just selecting here the nodes that belong to the class threat, right? And now we have, so this is the set of distributions that allows me to have 50% on the target, right? So we see that we have a proliferation of regional conflicts. We have a little bit of weaponization of economic I don't remember what is exactly the name behind that, and erosion of international norms and so on. So a few, and plus the North Korean here, military, yeah, it's going to be better like that, advancement on belligerence. So these are the marginal priorities, so on the threats that allows me to have an expected risk of 50% for the national security in Switzerland, right? And then, so we can speculate that we have the subject matter expert have defined this as an input, and then we want to find what are the optimal set of barriers that we can put in place in order to reduce the risk, but not just the risk, but also the cost, right? So here, obviously, this is not an easy exercise. So I just did something very naive. I said, okay, all my barriers have a cost of -1. So 0 if I'm not implementing them, -1 if I do. And then, so obviously it's not correct, but it's just here a toy example. And this one, for example, same thing for the mitigating barriers. And I also define cost associated with the consequences. So here I said it's not -1, but -10, because this is on the country. And so the only constraint that you have to take into account you have to think about like monetary scale. So because all these costs have to be comparable, right? So even if you have lives here, you will have to it's never easy, but to estimate what is the financial cost of life here to be able to compare them with the cost of putting in place barriers, right? And we have the utility function here that allows me to have access to the overall utility, so the sum of all these diamonds in my network, right? And this is going to be my target. So I want to optimize this utility function, so this function node. So I'm using a genetic algorithm for that. And then I say, okay, right now my overall utility is -31, and I want to minimize it. So it's going to be 0, the optimal, even though I cannot reach that. I can choose between hard evidence and numerical evidence. Here, for the sake of simplicity, I'm using the hard evidence, but nothing prevents me to use the other one. And then I do OK. And then the BiseLab genetic algorithm are then used for finding the best set of barriers, right? And here I have scenarios that have been automatically created. So I can go through the different scenarios. So this, I'm going to just choose the best one here. So the one with a score 12.98. And we can see that we have, so we are not using the coordinated and effective Western sanction. We are using the strong transatlantic alliance and US commitment. We are going to use the robust national defense and intelligence capabilities, the high national economic resilience and diversification, and so on and so forth. You can see all the barriers that are true have been chosen for reducing not only the priority of the risk, but mainly at the end of the day, the overall utility, so which means all the consequences associated with the main risk here. Okay. And here I can see the value here is -13. So the value of the overall utility, so sum of all these utilities. And then, so the last part of this webinar, and I can see I'm on schedule, perfect. So this is the web simulator. So now I want to use this network and create a web interface that will allow everybody to use it and to simulate scenarios. So I'm starting from Bayesian, so I have my network here. And then I go to Tools, Web Simulator Editor. I have this wizard that allows me to choose what are the nodes. So you can see the list of the nodes on the left. So the colors are those associated with the nodes, and it allows you to quickly identify the classes. So we have the three tabs here to populate. So the first one are the characteristic of your simulator. So just define the name, an author, the field of study, the type of analysis, the color you want to use. So here I'm choosing the red for Switzerland. Here, description of the network. You can associate here the radar just to as an illustration of the network. Then we can here use GenAI for creating this little icon that represents risk associated with Switzerland national security. And since we have red here, I'm gonna also go back to my theme color and pick the exact same color as the one that is in my icon. And then I can choose, the main risk here because I'm gonna define what we call an adaptive questionnaire, what I've shown you before in Bayesian. So here I need to define that I have a target. So this is my main risk. And then I can choose what are going to be the layout associated with. So we are going to have three different layers, if you want, in the web simulator. So we have one for the input nodes, one for the output, and also one for history, right? So we are choosing grid for input output and accordion for the history, right? We choose variation, and then we are going to define what are the inputs. So I'm using my class here, selector. Then I'm just choosing what are the threats. And I'm defining what is going to be the component I'm going to use for allowing the people to define their inputs. So it's going to be probabilities. So I just don't want true and false. I want to allow people to define a level between 0 and 100. Then I'm associating the preventive barriers, same thing with probabilities. And then I'm switching to outputs. Go to my class selector and select main risk first. So I'm going to use a gauge here, mean gauge, by using the mean value. So at the end of the probability of the risk to be true, if you will. And then I'm choosing the orientation of the gauge from green to red. So the higher the value is, obviously, the higher the risk is. And I'm also doing the same thing with the consequences, right? So mean gauges. Then green to red. And I'm also setting the format for the output. So I'm going to reduce the number of decimals and also choose percentage, right? Then when I click preview, I can have a static view of what's going to be the simulator. So this is just static, so which means you can see everything is 50-50. So there is no way, there is no inference behind that. So the API is not plugged, if you want, in this preview. So this is just to check if the colors, the icons, everything is correct, right? Okay, so now I go back to Bayesian. I'm gonna save this network because this is what I'm gonna publish. And then I go back to my web simulator. I'm signing in to be able to have the right to publish it. It's a questionnaire. I'm selecting my XBL file, uploading it to the server. Then I can double check that everything is correct. Then I'm gonna also publish the network on Helix map. So this will allow people not only to have the simulator, but also have a way to explore the network that is behind the simulator, if you will. So then I go in Helix map, I have to go to details and switch it, because when I do that within the web simulator, it's the same thing as in BasilLab. It's published, as a work in progress slot. So I need to make it public. But first, I can also define some, the description for this network, right? So what it is used for, what is the description, and so on and so forth. And here I'm switching to work in progress to a free public slot here. So which means that everybody will be able to access this network. Here you can see when it's green here, it's public. When it's yellow, so these are my private, or my work in progress networks, right? And here I can see that this network has 68 nodes and 112 arcs. Then I go back to my web simulator and I'm gonna publish this web simulator. So it's same thing. I'm gonna use a public subscriptions that will allow you to have access to this network. And then I do run just to test it. And this is the network that is currently published. So I can then use a slider. So on the upper left corner, you see the input nodes, right? So here I said that the US foreign policy shift toward isolationism. So I set a priority to almost 85%. So this has an impact. So you can see on the right, the risk increased to 73%. You have the consequences below. And then I can also define what is the barrier I want to use in that case. So when you hover over the node, you have as a comment that is associated with the node, and so on and so forth. So you can, really play with that and do simulation, right? So at the very bottom, you have the history. So all the nodes that you have already, for which you have already set evidence. And here you have, if you click on the eye icon, you have the radar. Then you have here not the radar, the description. On the eye, you have the radar. Then you click on the link, you have access to helix map. And then here you can copy the link and have access to the QR code. So right now, if you use this QR code, you're gonna directly reach this model, right? So to conclude, I will invite you to sign up to HelixMap, because this is really public. So you can go there and you can create an account if you did not do it already. Then this will allow you to have access to all the public model, but you can also use it for, if you have BasilLab, to publish your network. And if you don't have BasilLab, but you can also use HelixMap. There is an Elixir within HelixMap that allows you to create these risk-centric causal networks, this knowledge graph. So you have 5 types of network that you can generate. You can also analyze documents. And you can also use the web simulator, so on the right. So you have the URL here that are displayed. So to access to the web simulator editor. And you can also have access to the simulator we published 3 weeks ago for the webinar on cybersecurity, and all other web simulators that are available here, right? So thank you for your attention. I think it's 6, perfect timing.